we very strongly believe in the potential of Africa because the continent has youthful population, whereas the rest of the world is aging. It has rich natural resources, and we have seen countries that are decisive to put in place strong policies and institutions to have good governance, that they can be highly performing, fast-growing economies. We have been a solid and reliable partner for Africa, especially now when the world has gotten into this shock upon shock upon shock period of time. What we have done when the pandemic hit was to mobilize swiftly very sizable emergency financing. Country after country benefited from an injection of liquidity. And then we did something historic. We provided our membership with record high special drawing rights contribution. This is our ability to create reserves from the strength of the totality of the membership. So Africa got, sub-Saharan Africa, more specifically, got $62 billion injection of liquidity and reserves from the fund when countries needed it the most. I'm not going to say who it was, but I remember vividly, we're in the midst of the pandemic, very high uncertainty, economies are brought to a standstill, and we deliver emergency financing with record speed. One of the African leaders received the emergency financing and called me when it was 2 o'clock in the morning for him to tell me how critically important this injection of resources was, truly life-saving. And to that very day, I think of us, of the fund, of our duty to everybody, but especially to our most vulnerable members, to be there when they need us. Mm-hmm. Today, we have 25 programs in sub-Saharan Africa, and a very important, something I'm very proud of. In sub-Saharan Africa, we have the largest number of our new long-term financing instrument because it is to help African countries deal with climate change. Africa has done nothing to create this problem. Africa is hammered so dramatically by it. So we took an extra effort to be there for Africa.
So, Madam Managing Director, you have said, and I listened to you talk about debt and say you cannot get yourself out of your mess by just borrowing and over-borrowing. But Africa is estimated, Sub-Saharan Africa is estimated to have up to $800 billion in debt, and that is growing, probably. Now, you may have injected some finances to different African countries, but how does that become effective when all these countries are still under that heavy burden and they want to borrow because they have infrastructural projects that they want to implement, but at the same time, they need the funds, but also they're short and they're unable to pay?
The story of that is country-specific. We can't put everybody in the same pot. We have 3 types of countries in Africa. Those that have access to markets and use this access responsibly, where debt is good because it is invested in growth and opportunities. We have those that have access to markets but have borrowed not so responsibly, with projections for a world that is always growing, and now we see growth is slow, where the issue of debt management, how can we get countries to be on a sound debt management part is critical. And then we have countries where sometimes not for fault of their own, that is not sustainable, it has to be restructured. We have put in place a very important three-pronged approach to the liquidity problems, but also the solvency problems we see in Africa. On the liquidity side, what we work with countries is to help them get more resources domestically and use this money wisely. Look, my very first trip to Africa when I became managing director was to a meeting in Dakar in Senegal on this very issue of debt. And what my message to everybody was, look, if you don't raise revenues, of course you're going to have a problem. We have established that revenues have to be 15% of GDP or more. So get your, especially your wealthy people and your wealthy businesses to pay their fair share, and then use money wisely. But then, of course, look at how the international community can help. Debt restructuring, debt reprofiling, sometimes debt forgiveness. The fund during COVID, we did 1 billion of debt forgiveness to our poorest members. So work from all sides.
Yeah. Now, you talk about restructuring, you've talked about consolidation, but when it comes to, for example, raising revenue, we've seen across the continent people really debate and sometimes grumble and sometimes actually go on the streets because of that, because it constitutes raising taxes, and sometimes it's confusing in terms of which sectors would be more effective. But at the same time, there's always the debate of the fact that African countries are at different stages of development. They have different conditions and circumstances. How challenging is this, and how do you help countries to really be able to achieve that without having upheavals in their countries?
Look, you said something very important. Countries are in different stages of development, and they face different types of problems. It is one thing to be in the Sahel. It's a different thing to be in Horn of Africa. It's a different thing to be Côte d'Ivoire, and it's a different thing to be Mali. So there's a very different situations. And we work very hard with countries to establish what exactly the status of the country is, diagnostics of the conditions. We are like a family doctor. We come, we take the vital signs, and then we establish what is the best way to have healthy economy of a country. Where we are particularly loud these days is on the topic of governance. If governments do not earn the trust of their people, it would be very difficult to take the steps necessary to build a strong economy. We have introduced, we call them governance diagnostics, as part of this health test we do. Sometimes there is pushback. Oh, we don't want you to look into the way we function. We concentrate on what we know. Are you transparent in your tax collection? Can we see the receipts? What did you spend the money for? Is there corruption? What can be done to eliminate it? And I think the more we also work with countries in these different circumstances with transparency from our side to tell people in Africa what do we do and how we do it, I think also the easier would be for the fund itself to convey the policy advice we offer. I want to say something about Voice for Africa. On November 1st this year, our board of directors would grow from 24 executive directors to 25. And the new one would be additional chair for Sub-Saharan Africa. Because the region has been underrepresented, and yet it is the region where I strongly believe the fund will have to engage more. Diversity of countries, some with very significant challenges. So we need to get to know each other more and better.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Now, I wanted to just go back a little bit to the issue of how the IMF is helping countries to deal with severe drought. Millions of Africans today are really under very severe situations, and they want to see if they can take comfort in knowing that IMF is working with their countries to deal with those situations.
Well, it is drought in one place and floods in another. Climate change is real, and the way we help Africa to address the challenge of climate change is threefold. One, when we now do this health check of countries, we look at the vulnerabilities to climate risks, so we can put in place policies that are building resilience to these shocks when they come. Two, we have created a special instrument, the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, exactly for that reason. And for the first time in our history, we offer long-term concessional financing to countries to build that resilience to climate shocks. And three, we bring others. We have created, we call it Business Roundtable. We have created a way in which we do our analysis, and then we invite other institutions, development banks, the private sector, of course, together with the government of the country, to say, okay, how can we get meaningful injection of finance, of resources? We did this, for the first time we did it with Rwanda. And it was so effective that now Rwanda says, we want to do a second program with the fund. In other words, we use the fact that the fund is recognized as the finance authority to call on others to zero in on Africa and provide more meaningful support to Africa.
Well, I would like to talk to you for the rest of the day, but I know time is limited. Is there anything you may want to say that perhaps I didn't ask that is so critical for you to mention at this time?
It is a difficult time for the world. It is a more fragmented, more distrustful world that we live in. Don't take it as given. Africa rightly has aspirations for its people. Use your voice to force reason and cooperation, because without it, a fragmented world would be a weaker world. Those that are today in a weaker position would be most severely impacted. So call for solidarity and count on us to be your agent.